What's up everyone, Darcblade here, returning with my Mass Effect 3 multiplayer class guide. Today we are going to be taking a look at one of the Earth DLC characters, the N7 Slayer Vanguard. Now, like all the Vanguard classes, the N7 Slayer is a very good hit and run character, but on top of that he comes with some very interesting direct damage abilities. Now, like all my characters in Mass Effect 3, I spec my characters for the harder difficulties in the game. I put maximum points into Biotic Charge, putting points into Barrier so it restores my shields every time I use Biotic Charge. I put points into Power Synergy over Weapon Synergy, but both are quite viable. And lastly, I put points into Radius so I can affect more people and stagger more people with my Biotic Charge. This is the basic Biotic Charge setup I use for pretty much all of my Vanguards. I put maximum points into Phase Disruptor, putting points into armor damage over shield damage. I put points into knockdown so I can incapacitate weaker enemies over Efficient Blast, although saying that Efficient Blast is quite useful, so this is pretty much down to personal preference, I find. Lastly, I put points into damage over Radius simply because I want Phase Disruptor to do more damage. Now, for the third ability, Biotic Slash, I put maximum points again into this ability. I put points into damage over range, simply because I think that the default range of 20 meters is already quite significant. As for detonate and recharge speed, I find both of these quite viable. It depends if you play with other Biotic characters, which I do, in which case having detonate is far more useful, as it increases the force and damage of your teammates' Biotic explosions. Lastly, I put points into damage over radius, simply because I want my Biotic Slash to be doing a lot of damage. As for the passive abilities N7 Slayer and Fitness, I feel these are down to personal preference. I put points into increasing the force and damage of my abilities, as well as increasing my weapon weight. I also put a few basic points into Fitness just to give me a little bit more health and shields. Finally, as for weaponry, I go with a light submachine gun or pistol with the N7 Slayer Vanguard. You'll want to have a fairly quick recharge timer as the N7 Slayer, so don't weigh yourself down with too much weaponry. Now, let's get into the main part of the episode and talk about the N7 Slayer's moves and abilities. Its first move, the move that all Vanguards have, is Biotic Charge. Biotic Charge is a move that propels the Vanguard towards enemies with biotic energy, slamming into them and dealing damage. Biotic Charge comes with a number of other benefits, as well as dealing direct biotic damage towards opponents. Firstly, it enables you to traverse the battlefield quite quickly. For example, if you target an opponent on the other side of the map, you can use Biotic Charge on him and thus get yourself over to the other side of the map within a matter of seconds. Secondly, the force and power of Biotic Charge enables you to stagger almost any opponent. Weaker opponents are actually knocked down completely thanks to the force of Biotic Charge. The effect of this is actually increased if you put points into Radius in the Biotic Charge tree, meaning that you can affect multiple people with this staggering effect. The third advantage of having Biotic Charge is it can be used to activate combos. This can be tech or biotic combos. Unfortunately, for the N7 Slayer, he has no means of setting up his own biotic combos. Thus, you have to rely on your teammates' moves and abilities to set up any type of combo. The last, and in my opinion, the biggest advantage of having Biotic Charge, all depends if you put points into Barrier in the Biotic Charge tree. This enables you to restore your own shields every time you use Biotic Charge. This makes Biotic Charge a great survival mechanism, as it gives you an option of restoring your shields, or in this case barriers as it's a Vanguard, as and when you please. However, this does not make you invincible. Be careful with Biotic Charge, because you might accidentally charge into a group of enemies that you can't handle. Or you might end up charging into an enemy that has the capabilities of insta-killing you. You can charge an enemy that has an insta-kill ability, but this is mainly reserved for emergency situations, like for example when you have no shields or are low on health, or if you've got a clear shot at their back. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the second move and ability in the N7 Slayer's arsenal, the Phase Disruptor. Phase Disruptor transfers the N7 Slayer's biotic barrier into a little gadget on his hand that then fires a high-powered energy beam towards opponents. Phase Disruptor is a pinpoint accuracy move. Unlike other biotic and tech moves, there is no aim assist when using Phase Disruptor. This can make it quite hard for people who aren't very good at aiming, put it that way. But as a plus side to it, it does have a small explosion wherever it hits, so it can affect multiple enemies. The actual damage is the same for everyone who has been affected by the explosion of the Phase Disruptor. Now, the biggest con about Phase Disruptor, and why some people don't use it, is that it drains the N7 Slayer's barriers in order to use it. However, you can counteract this if you use it in combination with the N7 Slayer's Biotic Charge ability, if you've put the talent points into the barrier in the Biotic Charge tree. Basically, this means that you have the potential to fire off Phase Disruptor twice, follow that up with Biotic Charge to instantly restore your barriers, and simply rinse and repeat this method, and you should never have a problem with Phase Disruptor. A few side notes about Phase Disruptor. Firstly, it's classed as a combat power surprisingly, and thus can only be used to activate tech combos. It can't activate biotic combos or set up any type of combo. Also, be aware that Efficient Blast doesn't reduce the actual cost of Phase Disruptor by as much as you may think, because casting Phase Disruptor costs 50% of your shields. This talent reduces that 50% by 25% and not the actual 100% of your shields. Remember too that Phase Disruptor is reliant on your shield and as thus doesn't have a cooldown timer at all. Lastly, be aware that Phase Disruptor is one of them abilities that is really affected by lag. So if you're in a game with bad connection, it could really affect your performance as the N7 Slayer. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the third and final ability of the N7 Slayer, Biotic Slash. Biotic Slash is very similar to the N7 Shadow's Electric Slash, but instead of it being a tech-based move, it's a biotic-based move. The N7 Shadow will charge his sword with biotic powers and unleash this with a front-forward acrobatic flip, sending a cascading wall of biotic energy towards opponents. This effect will actually deal a lot of damage, and it will flatten unprotected enemies. Unprotected enemies are enemies without armor, shields, or barriers. There are three main advantages for using Biotic Slash. The first is that it can dish out a lot of damage for a biotic move. The second is that it can be used to activate combos, both tech and biotic. And finally, the third reason, and in my opinion the best, is that it can pass through walls and obstacles to hit opponents who are out of your line of sight. This is very useful, especially on the harder difficulties, as you are able to position yourself out of danger and still do damage to your opponents. There is a big drawback to Biotic Slash, and that is it has a long wind-up time. There is an animation the N7 Slayer goes through in order to cast it, and during this time you are quite vulnerable. You can't duck behind cover and you're not invincible, so there is a high chance you'll take needless damage if you cast Biotic Slash in the wrong position. As for the N7 Slayer's passive abilities, I always say these are down to personal preference. I personally put points into increasing the power, damage and force of my abilities, as well as reducing the actual weight of my weaponry. As for fitness, I felt I just needed a few extra points into the fitness tree in order to give myself a little bit more health and shields. Now the N7 Slayer as a race is a human, and thus has similar amounts of health and shields as the other human characters do. But unlike the other human characters, he comes with some very special dodge and melee abilities. The N7 Slayer feels like a combination of the N7 Adept and the N7 Shadow, in terms of he has the dodge abilities of the N7 Adept with the sword capabilities of the N7 Shadow. His dodge move is a small biotic teleport move, able to avoid damage very quickly. This move can also be used to pass through obstacles and walls that are not too thick. You can also use this dodge to teleport up ladders as well. Unfortunately, this does come at a cost, as it depletes your shields a little bit every time you use the dodge. Now the N7 Slayer's melee capabilities all revolve around his sword, his monomolecular blade. His basic melee attack is a teleport sword slash. You can press the melee button multiple times and the N7 Slayer will end up doing a flurry of teleport sword slashes on opponents that can bring down enemies quite easily. His heavy melee is a teleport that follows up with a powerful sword slash. This is quite a powerful move, but you have to be careful. If you use it when you're too far away from an opponent, then you could end up teleporting past them or falling short of them. This could potentially get you into more trouble than it's actually worth. So that is pretty much it for the N7 Slayer. It feels like a character that is best suited at protecting your team's flanks, although he has some very good hit and run capabilities, thanks to Biotic Charge. He also can dish out a lot of damage to multiple opponents, making him a great AoE character thanks to Biotic Slash. Now one thing I should say, that if you really don't like using Phase Disruptor, then I would completely drop the ability in favour of maxing out all the other trees. I would also like to note there is an N7 Slayer melee build out there too, but I am not a fan of melee builds. However, I might show you in the future. Anyway, I've been Darcblade, bringing you my guide to the N7 Slayer Vanguard in Mass Effect 3's multiplayer. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like for more.